So, it's time for Sweden to have an election. For most people around the world, it's not really a big deal. But for Swedes it is. Voting has always been a cornerstone of Swedish society, with sayings like, if you don't vote, you have no right to complain when shit goes sideways. So I was thinking about doing a short series about the election. However, me being sick made that quite impossible. So this is going to be a quick edited video, and I can't do a series on it. I will have to do a follow-up video on who won the election and what those parties stand for. And possibly later I'll do one that's more in-depth of each party. But we shall see. That is in the future. As I said, we Swedes pride ourselves in voting. Even if some people don't quite know what they're voting for, they just vote like their parents did or as their friends do. Since the 60s, the percentage of voters that have actually voted has never dropped below 80%. In fact, from 1970 up to 1985, it was over 90%. Then it had a bit of a slump, dropping to just over 80% in 2002. It has since then been on an upswing again, and is now moving closer to 90% again. We shall see what the outcome of the percentage of voters will be this time. Right, so how the election works. Well, anyone can form a party in Sweden. The main problem is getting your platform out there and letting people know where you stand. It might be good to start as a non-profit organization first, to get some members and to help spread the word. Once that is all done, all you have to do is register the name of the party to the election agency. Say if you wanted a Kekistani party in Sweden, that would be possible. Now, in order to get any votes on budgets, bills, laws, etc., you need a certain percentage of votes. Right now it's 4% in Sweden. That is a guarantee to get at least one seat to vote for things. There are 410 fixed seats in the cabinet. They are divided among all the parties that got over the 4% mark. But since there has always been a bit of a downside handing out seats, there is almost never a time that a party gets exactly the same amount of seats that their votage percentage would imply that they would have gotten. This since we've always rounded up the numbers. This means that some parties will get a lot more seats and some parties will get less seats. There are therefore some equilibrium seats, 39 in total. These are divided among the parties that have lost seats. Now, the votes themselves aren't just tallied up and then divided. We have districts, which could be called counties if you like. Then, of course, we have the three big cities, well, big by Swedish standards, Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö. They count as their own districts. There are 29 districts in total. Now, if a party doesn't get a 4% total of all the votes in the country, there is still a way to get a mandate or a chair. That is, if you're able to get 12% or more in one of the districts. Now, the reason for having these hurdles or blocks is because if there are too many small parties, that would take up space in the government and it would be extremely hard to make compromises, which is generally how democracy works. One party can't get all bills, laws, etc. passed without dealing with other parties. That is, unless they get more than 50% of all the total votes. Now, as far as I can tell, this has only happened twice in Sweden's history. Both of the time it was the Social Democrats, in 1940 and 1968. When this happens, as long as all the members with seats votes with the party, then they can basically enact anything they want. Now, when it comes to the Constitution of Sweden, those laws are harder to change. One vote has to be made. Then there has to be an election, and after the election there is another vote. Then the changes are enacted, if they pass both times. This is mainly in place to make sure that if some party gets more than 50% in one election, they can't just change the constitutional laws there and then. This to make takeover by authoritarian powers much harder. They have to get 50% or more next turn as well, or get more parties to agree to the law change. Or, of course, if parties from both left and right want this change in the constitution, it will be possible to make the change. We really don't want a dictatorship in Sweden. Now, I might go into the Swedish constitution at some other time. This time I need to focus on the basics of the government. Now, once the seats are divided among the parties, the party with the most votes will have to try and get other parties on board to form a government. The usual setup has been like this for quite a few years. On the left side, we have the Social Democrats, the Environmental Party, and the Left Party, former Communist Party, for a coalition on the left. On the right, we have the Moderates, the Liberates, the Center, and the Christian Party. Yeah, I know. It's kind of weird to have a religious party in a secular country, but there we are. They aren't very big anyway. So there are these two major blocks. Then, of course, we have the Sweden Democrats. This party does have its roots in a Nazi party way back when it was once formed. But they have, ever since then, tried to do everything in their power to clean up the reputation, and they have removed most people who have openly expressed racist views from the party. How many still have these views but keep them quiet can only be speculated about, however. The Sweden Democrats have always been ostracized by the other parties, even though they got almost 13% of the total votes last time there was an election. No one was willing to have a discussion with them at all, which to me is utterly moronic. Over 1/10 of the population didn't get hurt at all. This might be one of the reasons they have been gaining ground since the last election. But I will get more into the Sweden Democrats at a later date. Right, so back to the government. As I said, the government is usually formed around these two major blocks. The major party and their allies then discuss what positions people of the different parties will have. The major party always gets the prime minister post. Currently, Göran Löfven of the Social Democrats. Now, most minister posts have a backup. Current backup prime minister is Isabella Lövin, Environmental Party. I'm only going to focus on the first minister of each post. Other major posts are Minister of Finance, currently Magdalena Andersson, Social Democrats. Minister of Defense, currently Peter Hultqvist, Social Democrats. Minister of Agriculture, currently Sven-Erik Buch, current Social Democrats. Minister of Justice, currently Morgan Johansson, Social Democrats. Minister of Culture, Alice Bah, Social Democrats. Minister of Commerce, Erik Damberg, Social Democrats. Minister of Social Affairs, Annika Strandhäll, Social Democrats. Minister of Education, Gustav Fridolin, the Environmental Party. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Isabella Lövin, the Environmental Party. Yes, it is the same person that has the backup for Prime Minister. As you noticed, there are no left party members in this lineup. That's because the Social Democrats and the Environmental Party decided not to include them. For the moment, I really don't know why, but they decided they weren't going to include them at all. Now, once all this is done, the group that is forming the government has to make a budget for the following year. And once again, every year up until the next election. If the group has a majority of seats, and they come to a conclusion within themselves, and can convince all the seat holders to vote as the party wants, then the budget will be passed. If it fails, then they will have to discuss with other parties on the other side to see what deals can be made to make the budget go through. This is more or less how all the votes go, which is why it's never a good thing to have a minority government. A government where either bloc has less than 50% of the seats. Decisions will be that much harder to make and will take that much longer. However, that said, This is why the many parties exists. It is so that as many people as possible can get their voices heard. Well, up to a point where the party they voted for actually stick to the campaign promises they have made, and we all know how that usually goes. But yeah, this is about how the Swedish government works. The government makes the suggestions and the cabinet votes if the suggestion passes or not. Now, I know this was a bit of a snooze fest. Some might have found it interesting, though. And it's a good thing to understand how things work before I go into the different parties. Thanks for listening, guys. Stay tuned for the Swedish parties and the election results. Stay on the dark side.
May the facts be with you, always.